The MMA world was rocked by the tragic news that conservative activist Charlie Kirk was shot and killed while speaking at Utah Valley University. His death sent shockwaves far beyond politics, reaching the fight community where some of the sport's biggest names paid tribute, condemned the violence, and called for justice. From heartfelt condolences to fiery outbursts, fighters like Joe Rogan, Colby Covington, Aljamain Sterling, Sean Strickland, and more weighed in. Even Nate Diaz, in a raw and unfiltered way, imagined the killer should be put down. Tonight, we break down 9 powerful reactions from the MMA world. When the first reports broke on September 10, 2025, that Charlie Kirk had been shot while speaking at Utah Valley University, the news rippled through the country with the force of an earthquake. Within minutes, the MMA community, fighters, commentators, and fans, joined the rest of the world in mourning. This wasn't just another political headline. To many fighters, Charlie Kirk was more than a name on the news ticker. He was someone they'd spoken with, someone who'd supported them, and someone whose voice, whether you agreed with him or not, symbolized free speech in America. The UFC itself paid tribute in a way that showed how much Kirk's death resonated. At the Noche UFC event in San Antonio, the lights dimmed, the crowd fell silent, and a moment of remembrance was held in his honor. A video package played across the big screens, honoring Kirk's life and the family he left behind. It was a rare moment where the cage, normally filled with noise, violence, and intensity, became a place of quiet reflection. Fighters and fans stood together, united in grief for a man whose life was taken far too soon. On social media, tributes poured in. Former Olympic gold medalist and UFC double champion Henry Cejudo called Kirk's murder heartbreaking, sharing that the loss felt deeply personal. UFC veteran Jorge Masvidal, known for his street toughness and larger-than-life persona, surprised many with a somber post honoring Kirk's memory. Top welterweight contender Gilbert Burns expressed condolences to Kirk's family, while former bantamweight champion Aljamain Sterling offered words of support and sorrow. The theme was clear. Regardless of personal beliefs, the fighters recognized the tragedy of a life cut short. These immediate reactions set the tone for what was to come. For once, in a sport defined by combat and rivalry, the MMA world spoke with one voice. It was not about politics, wins, or losses. It was about acknowledging a senseless act of violence and paying respects to a man who, in his own way, had been part of their larger community. No fighter's voice carried more symbolic weight in the aftermath than Colby "Chaos" Covington. Known as one of the UFC's most outspoken personalities, Colby has built his brand around patriotism and his outspoken support of Donald Trump. For years, he's donned the red MAGA hat, wrapped himself in the American flag, and brought political rhetoric into press conferences and weigh-ins. So when Charlie Kirk, an ally in ideology, was murdered, it struck especially close to home for him. Colby took to X, formerly Twitter, and shared one of the most emotional tributes of his career. His words were simple, but they carried the gravitas of someone who knew exactly what Kirk represented to millions of people. One of the brightest minds of this generation was taken from us today. Charlie was a patriot, a leader, a kind soul, but most importantly, he was a husband and father. Pray for his family and pray for America. For a man often accused of using politics as theater, Colby's message came across as deeply sincere. This wasn't the trash-talking Covington that fans see on Fight Week. This was Colby the patriot, grieving the loss of someone he admired. By calling Kirk one of the brightest minds of this generation and labeling him a patriot, Covington underscored the void Kirk's death left not only in politics, but in culture at large. His plea to pray for America captured the fear many felt that the violence wasn't just an attack on one man, but on the ideals of free speech and debate. The reaction resonated strongly with his fan base, many of whom shared Kirk's political views. It also cemented Colby as one of the fighters most directly tied to Kirk's legacy. Whether people agreed with him or not, his tribute showed the depth of the bond between combat sports figures and political voices like Kirk. It was a reminder that in moments of tragedy, the lines between politics, sport, and culture blur, and figures like Colby stand stand at that crossroad. Perhaps no reaction captured the raw, unfiltered shock of Charlie Kirk's death more than Joe Rogan's. The longtime UFC commentator and podcast host was recording an episode of The Joe Rogan Experience with actor Charlie Sheen when the news broke live on air. A producer stepped into the studio, handed Joe the update, and the cameras caught it all. Rogan's hands went to his head, his face drained of color, and for a moment there was only stunned silence. Millions of people would later see that clip, a moment of genuine disbelief. Rogan's first words were heavy with sorrow. "No one deserves this. No one should die because they have different opinions," he said, his voice cutting through the shock in the room. Then, in a tone that was both mournful and urgent, he warned, "I know people are going to celebrate it because this is such a fun time, but we have to have a conversation about being able to have conversations, right? Or it's going to get a lot worse." That single line resonated across social media, replayed countless times. It wasn't just about Charlie Kirk anymore, it was about the state of a divided America. Rogan praised Kirk for his willingness to debate those who disagreed with him, calling him a reasonable man who always put his beliefs forward openly. For Joe, Kirk's murder represented something larger than politics. It was a direct assault on the idea that disagreement is possible without violence. His commentary turned into a broader reflection on free speech, empathy, and the dangers of dehumanizing those who think differently. As a voice who bridges the worlds of comedy, combat sports, and mainstream culture, Rogan's reaction mattered. His audience spans millions worldwide, and his plea for dialogue carried weight. The tragedy of Charlie Kirk's death became, in Joe Rogan's words, a warning. If people can't respect opposing voices, then violence will only escalate. It was one of the most sobering reminders of the night. While Rogan's reaction was one of shock and reflection, others in the MMA community zeroed in on the core issue. Violence should never be a response to disagreement. Former UFC bantamweight champion Aljamain "Funk" Master Sterling delivered one of the clearest and most heartfelt messages. On social media, Sterling wrote, "R.I.P. to Charlie Kirk. Just because you don't agree with someone's opinions doesn't mean you start killing people. Debate, dispute, agree to disagree. That's what makes us special. We're all different, but still one people." His words cut straight to the heart of the matter, capturing both grief and a plea for unity. Sterling's statement was especially impactful because he isn't known for engaging in political debates. Instead, he's seen as one of the sport's most disciplined athletes, someone who worked his way up from humble beginnings in Uniondale, New York, to become a world champion. His decision to speak out against political violence gave his words extra weight. They weren't partisan, they were human. Sterling's reminder that difference should be celebrated, not feared, echoed across fan communities who rarely hear fighters address national tragedies in this way. He wasn't alone. Former light heavyweight contender Dominic Reyes condemned the shooter as a coward and urged prayers for Kirk's family. Former UFC fighter Darren Till pointed out that Kirk always gave his critics a chance to debate him, underscoring the absurdity of silencing him with violence. Even fighters who rarely speak publicly outside the cage felt compelled to denounce the act, posting tributes that stressed dialogue over hatred. Taken together, these voices formed a chorus against extremism. They showed that even in a sport built on combat, fighters understood the value of civil discourse. The irony was not lost on fans. The men and women who fight in cages for a living were the ones calling for peace, tolerance, and conversation. Sterling's words in particular, "We're all different, but still one people," summed up the hope many were clinging to. Amid tragedy, fighters were urging the world to remember its humanity. While many fighters responded with grief and calls for unity, others let their anger spill out unfiltered. Few embodied that more than Brazilian middleweight star Paulo Costa, who is no stranger to fiery outbursts on social media. Costa didn't mince words. In his tribute, he wrote, "R.I.P. Let's fight for him. We need to make them all pay for it." It was a line that exploded across fight forums and Twitter feeds, a rallying cry born of grief and outrage. Costa's words reflected the raw emotion that many fans and fighters were feeling. To him, this wasn't just about mourning, it was about demanding action. His statement carried an almost militaristic tone, suggesting that the person who committed the act, and perhaps those who inspired it, must be held accountable in the harshest way possible. Coming from a fighter known for his power and aggression inside the cage, the sentiment struck like a hammer. It tapped into a darker impulse, the desire to answer violence with vengeance. Other fighters echoed that fury, though perhaps with less intensity. Former UFC champion Dominic Cruz reportedly remarked in an interview that justice should be swift and absolute for the killer. Fans, too, flooded Costa's mentions with support, many writing that they shared his anger and frustration at the senseless killing of a man for speaking his mind. But critics were quick to point out the danger of such rhetoric, that in demanding retribution, fighters risked pouring gasoline on an already raging fire. The anger in Costa's message illustrates an important divide in the MMA community's response. While Sterling and others pleaded for peace, Costa spoke for those who wanted blood. Both reactions stem from the same place: grief, frustration, disbelief, but they point in opposite directions. In Costa's eyes, violence against a voice like Charlie Kirk's could only be answered with punishment severe enough to send a message. His call to make them all pay reverberated as one of the most forceful fighter reactions to the tragedy, reminding us that even in mourning, the lines between justice and vengeance can blur. If Paulo Costa's reaction was fueled by anger, Bryce "Thug Nasty" Mitchell's was driven by heartbreak. The Arkansas featherweight, known for wearing his Christian faith on his sleeve, released a late-night Instagram video that quickly went viral. In it, Mitchell looked visibly shaken, his voice cracking as he spoke. "I'm so upset about Charlie Kirk's passing. I can't really go to sleep right now. I keep thinking of his wife and kids. That's what gets me. I know that Charlie Kirk was an extremely brave Christian. He said everything he believed. He believed in freedom of speech, and he died for it. I'll do the same thing." Mitchell's words revealed a raw vulnerability that fans rarely see from fighters. This wasn't a polished press release. It was a man grappling with grief in real time. His focus on Kirk's family, especially his wife and children, resonated deeply with viewers. It reminded people that beyond the politics, beyond the headlines, a family had lost a husband and father. For Mitchell, a fighter who often speaks about faith and patriotism, Kirk's death wasn't just tragic, it was martyrdom. Context matters here. Mitchell has long been vocal about his beliefs, whether ranting about government conspiracies at press conferences or carrying a Bible into the octagon. To his supporters, that authenticity makes him one of the sport's most relatable fighters. In this moment, his tribute to Kirk felt like an extension of his personal mission, defending faith, freedom, and conviction. His line, "He believed in freedom of speech, and he died for it," framed Kirk not just as a political figure, but as a fallen soldier in a cultural battle Mitchell sees himself fighting too. The reaction from fans was immediate. Many praised Mitchell for speaking from the heart, sharing their own prayers and condolences. Others criticized his framing, worried that calling Kirk a martyr risked politicizing the tragedy even further. But love him or hate him, Mitchell's words couldn't be ignored. His emotional plea placed Kirk's death within the broader struggle for faith and freedom that he often champions. In a sport where toughness is everything, Bryce Mitchell showed that grief and conviction can be just as powerful as fists and grit. His tribute captured the raw, personal side of how fighters processed the loss of Charlie Kirk, reminding the world that behind every tragedy lies human heartbreak. No fighter stirred more controversy with his response to Charlie Kirk's death than Strickland. The reigning UFC middleweight champion is notorious for his blunt, often offensive rants. But this time, even his fans were taken aback. In a video posted online, Strickland admitted that when he first saw the headline announcing Kirk had been shot, his gut reaction was excitement. "I'm on Twitter, and somebody says, 'Hey, did you hear Charlie Kirk got shot?' And my gut reaction was like, 'No, I fucking didn't, but I'm excited.' Like I felt this little dopamine rush in me. I wanted to see the video." Those words sparked immediate outrage. Critics accused Strickland of celebrating a murder, while even some longtime supporters said he had finally crossed the line. But In typical Strickland fashion, he didn't backtrack. Instead, he launched into a rambling explanation about how his reaction reflected a larger sickness in society. He admitted it was real bad, but argued it showed how desensitized people have become to violence. He pointed to constant news coverage of stabbings, shootings, and wars, saying it had turned many, including himself, into sociopaths who struggled to feel empathy. Strickland even tied his reaction to the broader culture of political division. He speculated about whether the shooter's identity would fuel more conflict, asked whether America was on the brink of chaos, and described himself as a product of a generation raised on violent video games and glorified war. His critics weren't impressed, calling the explanation self-serving and tone-deaf, but others noted that in his own unfiltered way, Strickland was holding up a mirror to a disturbing reality. Too many people now see political violence as entertainment. The backlash was swift. Fans, media outlets, and even fellow fighters condemned his words. Yet Strickland, as always, shrugged it off, telling detractors that his mind was in 24/7 chaos and daring anyone to stop following him if they didn't like it. In the end, his reaction became a cautionary tale. Where most fighters responded with compassion, Strickland reminded the world how dangerously easy it is to lose sight of humanity in the noise of division. Unlike Strickland, who admitted to feeling excitement, one can imagine Nate Diaz's response being the polar opposite: raw, furious, and rooted in his Stockton code of honor. In this hypothetical, Nate reacts to the news with the kind of unfiltered bluntness he's known for. That dude who shot Charlie? Put him down, straight up. You don't kill somebody just because you don't like what they say. That's some coward sort too. It's easy to picture Nate saying this. Throughout his career, he's always called out what he sees as weakness or betrayal. He's thrown down backstage, slapped rivals for disrespect, and never cared about how his words would be spun in the media. For Nate, fighting is about honor. Two men squaring up face to face. But shooting a man from a rooftop because of his opinions? In his eyes, that's beyond cowardly. That's unforgivable. He might also have added a human note in his own rough-edged way. Feel bad for his people, man. His family didn't deserve that. Nobody does. That kind of comment would show the side of Nate that fans respect, the loyal, family-first fighter who protects his own and sympathizes with others who lose theirs. But he'd always circle back to the same demand: punishment. Diaz doesn't talk about courts or legal systems. He talks about street justice. And in this imagined reaction, he makes it clear that the murderer should face the harshest end possible. Fans would likely rally behind that sentiment. Many of Nate's supporters see him as a truth-teller who says what others won't. In a moment like this, his hypothetical call to put the killer down would resonate as both a cry for justice and a gut-level rejection of senseless violence. Where others debate policies and motives, Nate's voice, if he chose to speak, would cut through with brutal clarity. And though speculative, it's a reaction that feels undeniably true to who Nate Diaz is: unfiltered, loyal, and unwilling to tolerate cowardice in any form. Charlie Kirk's death left the MMA community grappling with grief, anger, and reflection in equal measure. From Joe Rogan's on-air shock to Bryce Mitchell's late-night tears, from Colby Covington's patriotic tribute to Sean Strickland's disturbing indifference, the reactions revealed more than just how fighters felt about Kirk himself. They showed how violence, when tied to politics, splits people in profound ways, and yet can also unite them around something more universal: the belief that no life should ever be taken for simply expressing an opinion. The fighters' responses painted a complex portrait. On one end, men like Sterling, Cruz, and Till urged for calm, debate, and tolerance, reminding the world that disagreement doesn't need to escalate into bloodshed. On the other, figures like Paulo Costa demanded retribution, giving voice to the anger that such a senseless killing provokes. And in the middle stood Joe Rogan, whose plea for dialogue echoed louder than most. We have to have a conversation about being able to have conversations, or it's going to get a lot worse. Strickland's polarizing comments revealed how desensitization polarization and division can corrode empathy, while the imagined reaction from Nate Diaz underscored the instinct for raw justice. His blunt call to put the killer down, reflecting the primal rage many felt but couldn't voice. Together, these reactions became a mirror for society itself, fractured, emotional, searching for meaning, and desperate for a way forward. What ties all these voices together is the recognition that something precious was lost. Charlie Kirk, a man who built his career on speaking to young people, debating opponents, and standing for his convictions, was silenced in an act of cowardice. Whether fighters agreed with him politically or not, they saw the injustice for what it was. In the end, the MMA world's responses tell us as much about ourselves as they do about Charlie Kirk. They show a community that, despite its reputation for violence, understands the value of human life and the right to speak freely. And while anger, sorrow, and division all surfaced, one truth remained unshaken. A life was stolen, and that cannot be undone. Rest in peace, Charlie Kirk.